Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about something old and something new. Something old is the definitions that we use as the building blocks for the easier way to sell. And I'm talking about the definition of problem, business, and closing. Following that, we're going to be talking about some of the traditional ways to sell and close. The reason I'm doing that is I want those of you who know those ways to sell and close to listen to them and say, Ike's way really is easier. And for those of you who are not that far along in your sales career, I want you to hear these and then forget you ever heard them and never use them again. And we'll also talk about how this system is designed to be effective 100% of the time. And it isn't. That should have you thinking for a few seconds. Let's get right to it. Establishing building blocks as part of structural integrity is really the key in creating something that lasts. Well, here are the building blocks of the easier way to sell. I've covered these before, but it's time to cover them again. The first building block of the easier way to sell is understanding the definition of a problem. For our purposes, a problem is something that exists when there is a difference between what you have and what you say you want. And with this definition, a problem can actually be something that is positive. For instance, my yacht is too small, or I have too much money in my bank account and it's no longer covered by insurance. Business. What is business? Business is the ability to solve other people's problems and get compensated for it. Isn't that what you do? I mean, if the prospect knew how to solve the problem on their own, they would. If they wanted to solve the problem on their own, they would. But if they can't, they don't want to, or they don't know how to, they're looking for someone they like and they trust who can help them move from where they are to where they say they want to be. In other words, your job is to help them solve their problem. And the third building block is closing. And closing is your ability to create an environment in which your prospect comes to the conclusion on their own that your product, your service, or your idea will do what? That's right, it will solve their problem. And not to put too fine a point on it, when you solve other people's problems, what happens to yours? They get solved too. So solve other people's problems, and your problems will be solved also. In the mid-1980s, I was training salespeople in the financial services industry, and at that moment in my career, I was a champion for the traditional model of selling known as AIDA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I was out on an actual, this is not a drill sales appointment with a brand new trainee, and this would be the first time this person was going to hear the entire presentation. We met with the prospect at the prospect's home and got things set up to give the sales presentation. We sat at his kitchen table, and I proceeded to give what I know to this day was a wonderful sales presentation. And when I finished that presentation, the prospect looked at us both, and then he said to me, "I really need to think about it." My stomach seized. My smile remained. I agreed that it was an important issue. I assured him that the issue was worthy of any thinking process he had to go through. I then changed course and asked the prospect if he would grant us 5 more minutes to go over a little exercise that might help him make up his mind. He said he was willing to give it a shot. This was the opening I was waiting for. I knew that this would be a great demonstration for my trainee to witness. I proceeded to tell the prospect that there was a great American statesman who, when confronted with an "I need to think about it" situation, would take out a sheet of blank paper and draw a line down the middle. He'd put a plus sign on one side of the line and a minus sign on the other. He would think of all the reasons to go forward, and then he'd put those reasons one by one under the plus. Then he would think of all the reasons not to go forward and put those under the minus sign. After finishing the exercise, the statesman would add up the number of reasons under the plus sign, and he would add up the number of reasons under the minus sign, and whichever column had the greatest number of entries would guide him to his decision. Well, I looked at the man and said, and that great American statesman was Benjamin Franklin, and if that exercise was good enough for him, it'll probably be good enough for us. And then I asked him if he was willing to go through that exercise with me. And he said, well, yeah, but before I do, I just want to tell you, that was the best presentation of the Ben Franklin balance sheet close I've ever heard. Busted. The Ben Franklin balance sheet close had become an old-fashioned way to sell. It became old-fashioned the minute the prospects and the clients knew about it. We had to figure something else out. But you've heard me say that there's nothing wrong with the old-fashioned way of selling. It's true. The old-fashioned approach to selling works. You just have to work too hard to make it work. The old-fashioned way to sell is inconsistent and unreliable. You give a great presentation and it's followed by a sale. You go to your next appointment and you give the same identical presentation in the same identical way and you don't get the sale. What is that all about? Well, I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating and it's stressful, and there had to be an easier way. But it wasn't always like that. The old-fashioned way to sell was the salesman's golden ticket. The salesman talked, the buyer listened, the buyer bought. And then came the consumer revolution of the 1960s, led by Ralph Nader, and that was followed soon after by Consumer Reports. Shoppers all of a sudden had this hunger for information, and this increased the value of competitive knowledge. Once the internet came on the scene, your clients and prospects had at their fingertips the option, the ability to become almost exponentially more sophisticated than their social counterparts, like you, a salesperson. You know how easy it is to get educated on any topic these days? I'm almost to the point where I truly believe someone could perform brain surgery after they learned how to do it on YouTube. In your heart, you know that most of your clients and prospects have seen the same traditional sales videos. They've heard the same tapes. They've read the same sales books or attended the same how-to sell classes. I realized that prospects had become as sophisticated, or in some cases, even more sophisticated than I was when it came to sales techniques and approaches. And it was around that time that I started looking for a different way to sell. And you know what? I couldn't find one. So over the next couple of years, I created a different way to sell. I went back to one of my first loves, the study of communications theories and models. I had a notebook with pages and pages that had a bunch of boxes and circles and squares and arrows. And these shapes represented the parts of a communication that made me either comfortable or uncomfortable. I kept what I wanted and took out what I didn't want, and voila, the yes formula was born. I had created a tool that transforms a certain type of adversarial communications process into a non-adversarial conversation. Consumers nowadays, and I'm talking about you and me and everyone else, know when we're being sold to. And you know what? You and I and everyone else don't like to be sold to. None of us. But you have to sell to live. Everyone has to sell to live. And you only have two communications options when it comes to selling. You can sell like you learned how to when you were young. This is where you communicate in an unconscious zone. You wing it and you do whatever you do comfortably and naturally, and if it works, it's marvelous. However, if successful selling was a comfortable and natural activity, everyone would be successful at sales, and we know that's not true. Studies have shown that fewer than 5% of any given population is successful at any given endeavor doing what comes comfortably and naturally. So, good luck with that. And if you're not winging it, then you're most likely following one of the old-fashioned sales training blueprints that were designed to sell something to somebody whether they want it or not. Now, that's not to be taken as a criticism of selling, because getting someone to buy was the objective of that sales model. Or here's an example of one of the more traditional blueprints. I covered AIDA in an earlier episode, but as I've done before, it's time for me to give a shout out to my favorite movie about sales, Glengarry Glen Ross. When you watch the film, you'll see actor Alec Baldwin explain dramatically the AIDA model of selling. And if you haven't seen it, I invite you to watch it, or if you have seen it, watch it again, if for nothing else than that great scene. Then smile because you know about the easier way to sell. Let's stay with that for a second. You know who finds this system really valuable? People who've been selling for a while. People who've been selling for more than a short period of time find this system more valuable and learn it more quickly than people who are just getting started in sales. Well, I think I've discovered the reason. Those of you new to the world of selling haven't gotten frustrated enough with your current approach to sales. Once you've reached a certain level of the inescapable stress that accompanies the traditional sales process, you'll discover you need a different way also. Let's review some of the things you new salespeople might be learning. I'll bet you started to absorb some conventional sales patter and a few traditional sales closes. But if you don't already know these traditional closes and snappy patter, you should avoid learning them and just start with this system. If you already know and use them, it's time to begin to forget them. Okay, back to Baldwin. He said, A, you need to get their attention. Now, you might get their attention through a demonstration, a great opening line, a snappy script, or some other type of attention getter. But once you have their attention, it's time for I. It's time to increase their interest level. You explain why your offer meets or exceeds their needs, and then you measure their responses all the time. And this measurement might be accomplished through a traditional yes-set question. A yes-set question is known as a minor close. A minor close is designed to produce one yes in a long line of yeses, which lead ultimately to the sale being closed. A traditional yes-set question might be, if my product or service could do X for you, that would be good, wouldn't it? The first time I heard this technique was in the late 1970s. I was listening to an audio tape, which was what you listened to at the time. It was an audio tape of sales trainer Tom Hopkins, and he shared a type of question that promoted prospect buy-in. He labeled this type of question the tie-down. A tie-down, he explained, usually contains the word wouldn't. Wouldn't you, wouldn't I, wouldn't they, wouldn't it? Here's an example. Getting this warranty would give you peace of mind, Mrs. Smith, wouldn't it? Or, this home has a big backyard. Wouldn't having that open space be good for your children? You see how this works. Well, I heard this recording of Tom Hopkins himself in front of a group of about 100 people that made me laugh with affection. He said to the group, "This is going to be a fun day." He then shouted, "You'd like a fun day?" Went silent, and then he pointed to the crowd. And at that very moment, the crowd yelled, "Wouldn't you?" I guess you can call that a group tie-down. So, you use your trial close, and if you get even a whiff of interest from your prospect, it's your job to go to the D in AIDA and increase the prospect's level of desire. Now, if the prospect doesn't really have any level of desire, you must use your sales skills and create that desire. Here's where you talk about benefits that you didn't bring out in your original presentation, or you pull a really seductive financing option out of the bag. Whatever works. And once you start to sense that you've created that additional desire, you go into the final step, which is A for action. You begin the closing process. And when you close, you must be prepared to handle the objections that the client will throw back at you. And there are many techniques for handling objections. One such technique is labeled feel, felt, found. If you're not familiar with the feel, felt, found technique for handling objections, here's how it works. If a prospect says that they're not interested or they believe your product or service costs too much, you would then respond, "Oh, I can understand why you feel that way. Many people felt that way until they found out X." And of course, X is the appropriate feature or benefit that you wish to share with the prospect. As a sidebar, when you employ feel, felt, found, you have to be careful that you don't mismatch the prospect's channel. For instance, feel, felt, found works best on a kinesthetic. That would be someone who likes to get a grasp on things. For a visual, someone who receives and processes information most effectively through their eyes, you might say, I can understand why you see it that way. I saw it that way myself until I looked at it this way. And an auditory, someone who prefers to get their information through hearing, you might want to say, "I hear what you're saying. That's the way it sounded to me until I listened to." This is a perfect example of meeting someone at what I call their model of the universe, and it does call on you to figure out on which channel they receive and process information most effectively. And the easier way to sell provides you with the tools you need to help you identify those channels. And should you have little or no understanding about what I was just talking about, I invite you to go back to the very beginning of the podcast and start at episode 1. Right now, let's take a break and we'll get back to the closing conversation in a few minutes. As we continue to bring on new listeners from all around the world, I'm always fascinated about how you found the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast in the first place. Some of you have responded to my request to tell me how you heard about us. And I just want to let you know once again, we're glad you did hear about us, but we always want to know where our listeners came from. So drop us a note at closethedealwithoutselling@gmail.com. And when you're done listening to this episode, remember to go to the Close the Deal Without Selling page on Facebook and on LinkedIn and follow us. A lot of good things are about to happen, and I want to keep you informed. The Easier Way to Sell provides you with a strategy and a system that's designed to achieve your desired outcome, which is basically to make a sale or get that new client 100% of the time. And it doesn't, because no plan exists without the possibility of failure. As Napoleon said, every battle plan is perfect until you meet the enemy. Let's compare selling with this system to a sports-related playbook. These intricate playbooks contain a coach's battle plan. Every step, every action is contained in those pages. If you're an American football fan or you prefer soccer, you're probably familiar with what goes into one of those playbooks. There are pages and pages filled with charts and diagrams, with each chart containing X's and O's that signify the players, their assignments, and the most likely areas of resistance purposely created by opposing players. Each play in the playbook reflects a strategy and provides the tactics to make that play a success. Nearly every play in the playbook is designed to score a touchdown or make a goal, but there are only, on average, 2 to 3 scores per game due to the resistance of opposing forces. In football, these forces of resistance might be initiated by the other team's defense. It could be the weather, or it could be the physical and mental condition of the participants. But each play is designed to work 100% of the time, and they don't. The easier way to sell is designed to work 100% of the time, and it doesn't either. But in sales, you don't need to be successful 100% of the time. What you want to do is take your current success ratio and increase it incrementally. Even a small increase in your success ratio can boost your effectiveness, productivity, and profit by 20 to 50%. Regarding the easier way to sell, I'm going to quote an old TV commercial. Try it. You'll like it. All right, let's go back and finish up our conversation about the AIDA model for selling. Now, we've gone through the first A, which is get their attention. Then there's the I, which is increase their interest. Then there's D, which is to create desire if it doesn't already exist. And now it's time for the final A, which is action. It's time to take action. It's time to close the sale. Now, each time you begin the process of closing, it's time for a showdown between the prospect and you, and it's time for a showdown between you and you. You see, what you are about to do is not easy. If it were easy, everyone would do it. Here's what you're going to be told if you're new at the game. You'll be taught to close, handle objections, and close again. You'll be reminded to close early, close hard, and close often. You'll hear over and over that the ABCs of selling are always be closing. You'll be told to look at a no as a request for more information. And you're told you must ask for the sale. You were told to close the deal. And of course, you were coached to try to come off as sincere and as authentic as possible. Along with learning techniques to handle objections, you had to be armed with a variety of closing techniques. And all of these techniques are designed for you to be more effective in getting a yes. Can you identify the name of the close used by our salesman in this example? Would you like that delivered Tuesday, or would Thursday be better? This is, of course, an example of the alternative of choice close. Did you want that in green, or would blue be better? Let's go over a few more closing techniques, and one that comes to mind is the impending doom close. You've heard the impending doom close used on you, or you've used it on someone in your sales career, guaranteed. It goes something like this. Ring, ring, ring. Mr. Prospect, this is Billy down at United Widgets. I wanted to get in touch with you because we're having an increase in price coming this Monday, and I'd like to take your order before then so you can take advantage of our current pricing structure. You know, before the prices go up. So, did you want to order 2 dozen or would 4 dozen be better? Notice how the old alternative of choice close snuck in at the end? And then there's the puppy dog close. I love the puppy dog close. In my memory, the puppy dog close dates back to when I was a kid. Now, I didn't know anything about selling techniques, but I remember my parents going to a car dealership and then driving off the lot in a Buick of some sort. They were so excited because they got to try the car for 24 hours at no cost. I think they did this for fun, but one time the car actually became ours. Now, this close used to be used all the time in the car industry, but more recently, the puppy dog close has been used extensively in the multi-level cosmetics and vitamin organizations, and it's based on sampling. You can give the prospect a sample or a trial period in which they can decide whether the product is right for them. Now, the name the puppy dog close supposedly originated with a man who sold puppies. The man selling the puppies, we'll call him Ted, had two choices. When a family came to buy a puppy, Ted could ask for payment at that time, and he could offer a money-back guarantee if they weren't completely satisfied. Or two, he could offer the family the chance to take the puppy that they liked home for a few days with no money up front. He would tell the family to take the puppy home for 48 hours and get acquainted. At the end of the 48 hours, Ted would come by the family's home. If they liked the puppy, they could pay him the full amount, and if they didn't, they could just give him back the cute little dog. Ted claimed that few, if any, families ever gave him back a puppy once that dog and the family had bonded. Hence, the puppy dog close. Now, the reduction to the ridiculous close is still used all the time, and this close allows you to deal with a resistance to price. With this close, you're asked to break down the offending price from a monthly to a daily or even an hourly amount. For instance, I know that this product is $100 per month, but if you want to look at it another way, that's only about $3 a day, or basically 12 cents an hour. You did say this would be a very helpful item, didn't you? Next, you have the conditional close. You've used the conditional close at one time or another. So, let me see if I understand this correctly. If I can get it for you in green and deliver it to you by Thursday, you'd be willing to go ahead and sign the contract? And our last example was our first example, the Ben Franklin balance sheet close. All of these closes work. You just have to work too hard to make them work. And let me remind you that with the easier way to sell, there are virtually no closing techniques. Closing techniques are stressful. The goal of my model is and always has been to do away with stress-producing communication. So, objections? I've done away with objections. The key to devising this system was the ever-present goal that it function in a way that's diametrically opposed to the way you and I and everyone else were taught to sell. There would be no presentation in my sales model. There'd be no handling of objections. And you won't need closing techniques because in this unique conversational model for selling, your prospect accepts the responsibility willingly of giving the presentation and closing the deal themselves. This way of communicating gives you an opportunity to sell without selling, and as a bonus, objections disappear. Now, how could that possibly occur? How could that possibly be true? Because remember, it's your prospect giving you the presentation. Who do they have to object to? And as backwards as that sounds, that's really the way your sales calls will go. That's really the way the system works. That's why this is the easier way to sell. You'll be rid of the unpredictable sales call. As a matter of fact, the responses from prospects will be so predictable that you're going to have to keep yourself from giggling. In a nutshell, the easier way to sell is the easier way to sell. All right. That'll do it for this episode. One of the assignments I'd like to give you, if you haven't done it already, is memorizing those 3 building blocks for the YES formula, for the easier way to sell. I'm talking about the definitions of problem, business, and closing. Speaking of closing, now that you've heard all these traditional sales closes, remember my coaching. Forget them. You won't need them anymore. This is Krieger. See you next time.